Good morning, everyone. It is Monday, August 21st, and time for the AM edition of C2-A-Days from Campus to Canton. I am Nicholas Ian Allen. I've got a lot of notes to run down, mostly for scrimmages from over the weekend. For the vast majority of teams who are playing in week one, um, we're going through what they're calling final scrimmages ahead of opponent prep, turning the page from fall camp in general to more of that opponent specific preparation that we are going to see as teams inch closer to kickoff. The primary story, most likely, and not really any new news necessarily, but out of Alabama, Austin Hannon of Bama Central was one of several writers and sources who tried to dig into what happened for the quarterback situation for the Crimson Tide over the weekend. It sounds like, according to Hammond, that Jalen Milroe was taking the majority of first team snaps as expected, as had previously been the case. Seems fairly clear at this point. At least all the reporting and analysis seems to point to Jalen Milroe getting that first snap of the season for Alabama. According to Hannon, Ty Simpson also played well. In a performance against the first team defense during the scrimmage. And there's been a little bit of buzz recently about Dylan Lonergan, the true freshman out of Georgia, who has been getting some first team snaps as well. So, according to Hannon, Tyler Buckner also performed well, including a long scoring drive, had a touchdown to Kobe Prentice. But all indications as of right now are that Jalen Milroe leads the competition and is likely to start the season at quarterback for Alabama. Of course, this particular situation is notable. A lot of interest in Alabama specifically is one of the top 5 teams in the country according to just about everyone's metrics or polls, what have you. And it's an ongoing competition. So knowing that Milroe took those first snaps is important. In some of the notes that we're going to get to a little bit later, it's perhaps less important to know exactly who took those first snaps, and potentially there are quite a few situations actually where players will have sat out either because of just trying to guard against any potential injury. Plenty of these scrimmages. There were even some specifically where it seemed like the vast majority of expected starters did not participate to get younger guys an opportunity to show what they were going to do. And so it's important to note that we're very interested specifically in Alabama. There are certainly some others where there could be some news or something to glean out of who took the first reps, who played well, that sort of thing. But there are other teams where it doesn't necessarily matter, or it might not tell us what we think it might. So not all of these scrimmages and not all of these scrimmage reports are equal. So just keep that in mind as we move forward. A few other notes from Hannon at Bama Central. Roydell Williams, this is one of those situations that I was just touching on, apparently took the top number one snaps at running back. Most folks expected Jace McClellan to be the primary ball carrier for Alabama. That still may be the case. It's probably seems pretty likely that both will get a pretty heavy workload, but may or may not mean anything. But apparently, according to reports, Roydell Williams was the first running back during the scrimmage on Saturday. One player who was expected and still expected to contribute as a true freshman wasn't available. True freshman running back Justice Haynes was out on Saturday. According to Hannon and other reports, head coach Nick Saban called Haynes' situation a quad contusion. Quad injury is what also kept Jam Miller limited in the opening week of practice. He apparently is back and healthy now and in the mix. But as of right now, Justice Haynes is unavailable. Was unavailable the last few days leading into the scrimmage, so just something to keep an eye on as we get a little closer. One other note from the write-up here over the weekend at Alabama, apparently the first team receiver group on Saturday during the scrimmage was Jermaine Burton, Malik Benson, and Isaiah Bond. And there was some discussion from Saban about how drops had been an issue for the Alabama receivers really throughout fall camp, it sounds like, and continued a little bit on Saturday, but according to Saban, seems like things are improving. So I know we had talked earlier in the fall. Malik Benson is incredibly talented junior college transfer coming in. Most expect, and from a CFF college fantasy football perspective, has become the highest drafted of Alabama's wide receivers. But a week or so ago, according to similar reports, was practicing more with the second team on offense. Sounds like perhaps he is now on the field with the first group. But again, that could change. Doesn't necessarily mean that he should be written in stone as a starter, but also even if he weren't on the field first, talented enough, I would expect that he'll be involved early and often. At Missouri, Jaden Lewis of Rock M Nation had some notes on the scrimmage for the Tigers from Friday. There has been some discussion, of course, at the quarterback position. Brady Cook recently named a team captain. Sam Horn, talented young player. Apparently, both are in line to play in week one. It appears, according to Lewis, and also according to some quotes from head coach Eli Drinkwitz, that the three-man quarterback competition, which also was expected to include Jake Garcia, the transfer from Miami, apparently is a two-man competition now between Cook and Horn. The Missouri was one of the teams, as we mentioned, that in the scrimmage portion of practice really had the vast majority of its starting and contributing players not participating. The note from Lewis specifically mentioned the receivers, but it sounds like other positions perhaps were similar as well. And a couple of notes on a couple of projected starters. Defensive back Jalen Carlisle's and Chad Bailey both have been limited due to injury so far in fall camp. Drinkwitz, according to Lewis, said that Carlis is expected to be back in 100% by week one. Sounds like potentially Chad Bailey, who also had an off-the-field issue, legal issue to deal with after spring camp, potentially could be limited early on. We shall see. At Georgia Tech, Jackson Caudell of all Yellow Jackets had an interesting note. Myself, personally, I expected Haynes King to pretty much come in as the transfer from Texas A&M, started for the Aggies some last season, to come in and win the quarterback competition between he, Zach Pryon, and Zach Gibson. I don't know, relatively easily. Perhaps that was naive or too quick to judge. But it sounds like Jackson Caudell, who gives a good rundown. So there were several posts from All Yellow Jackets over the course of the weekend that offered quotes and insight from head coach Brent Key. And according to what he's seen, what he's heard, Jackson Caudell has stuck with his spring projection that Zach Pyron, should still be considered the number one quarterback, with Haynes King at number two. He does say it's a close battle, could go either way, but is still leaning towards Pyron. We're not expecting any official announcement. I do not believe, did not sound like we were expected to get one before the season starts. Georgia Tech opens up with a conference game against Louisville. So pretty important. Perhaps Key might think to keep things close to the vest leading into such an impactful game potentially. But at least according to one person close to the program follows daily. Zach Pyron, considered the quarterback, still potentially at the top of the depth chart. At Washington State, apparently Cam Ward had a incredibly impressive scrimmage. There was a glowing report from Greg Woods of the Spokesman Review about Ward's performance, who he listed the stats as having completed 13 of 16 passes for 194 yards and 4 touchdowns. Those touchdowns apparently went to Isaiah Hamilton, DT Sheffield, who's back and healthy, and that's definitely good news. Lincoln Victor, who was away for a day, and then true freshman Carlos Hernandez. So all the names perhaps we were hoping to hear, specifically Sheffield and Victor for me personally, but also Hernandez is someone who's got some folks excited, having emerged as a maybe not a starter, but a contributor, 2 deep player as a true freshman. Good to hear that Cam Ward, who there have been some reports in recent weeks that he's scuffled a little bit at times. So good to hear that he was sharp and very, very impressive. Also a note from Woods that Nakia Watson, the returning starter at running back, has not participated in either of the team's scrimmages so far this fall. Apparently, according to Woods, and we mentioned this towards the end of last week, Watson did not practice at all last week. So WSU coach Jake Dickert, this is coming from Woods, said that it was precautionary, just a measure to keep a presumptive starter healthy. But something to note, Nakia Watson has been limited perhaps more than most, and maybe his being held out of the scrimmage is more than just trying to keep him healthy. Perhaps he's not, healthy necessarily to begin with. So something to keep an eye on as we begin the season. At Arizona State, a semi-daily update from Jake Seymour of Sun Devil Source. From Sunday's practice, he mentioned that junior quarterback Trenton Bourgo took most of the snaps with the first team. Jaden Rashada did mix in some with the first team throughout the day, and also was the first quarterback there was a 1-minute drill toward the end of practice that Rashada got the first crack at. One item of note for the offensive line that would be protecting Bourgo and or Rashada, starting center expected to start Leaf Fotanu was unavailable, was not observed, I should say, in 2 straight practices. There were also, according to Seymour, Andre Johnson, the transfer wide receiver, was not spotted. I don't currently have Johnson projected as a starter, but he's got the potential perhaps to be a contributor. So an item of note there. A couple of 3 more quick quarterback notes before we move on to some other injury updates. From BYU, Jay Drew of the Deseret News noted that Keaton Slovis left the scrimmage on Saturday due to an illness. Doesn't necessarily sound super worrisome necessarily. We've mentioned some other players who've been dealing with a variety of illnesses, but perhaps BYU, one of those teams that's dealing with it a little bit right now. Hopefully everything will work itself out and everybody, including Slovis, will be back and fully healthy by week 1. At Appalachian State, Ryan Berger and Joey Aguilar both directed early touchdown drives with the first team offense, according to the official App State website. We mentioned before that Berger has the lead. Aguilar, it sounded like, perhaps entered spring practice with a little bit of a lead. It's gone back and forth, but just one little line and a quick write-up from the official team site. But it sounds like both are still getting reps with that first team offense. So take that for what it's worth. On a similar note, a Sea of Red, the Liberty site, Liberty specific team site, tweeted out late last week that make of it what you will, but Caden Salter is the first quarterback to take the field in the team 11-on-11 drills. So there's been at least 2, maybe 3 in the mix for Liberty at the quarterback position. Caden Salter, former 4-star recruit, I believe, some with Tennessee, and then transferred quickly to Liberty. Most expect him to eventually win out, probably the most talented overall, but Jonathan Bennett has seemingly up to this point been the leader. Perhaps the previous coaching staff, it seemed like, trusted him a little bit more, and that could be the case for new head coach Jamie Chadwell as well. But at least in this one observation, Slovis got those first team reps. A Sea of Red also, and John Manson specifically, wrote up a running back preview that offered a little bit different projection on the running back situation than previously expected. He listed the front runners at the B-back position as Quentin Cooley, and as the secondary back, both A and B back, Billy Lucas, incoming transfer, seemingly have the edge to start for the Flames. He listed among the players in the competition, so I read that as being second teamers right now. At A-back, both Von Blue, the true freshman, who was projected as a starter by Phil Steele in his preview magazine, had gotten a lot of buzz in the spring. Also, Victor Venn considered competition at A-back, and at B-back, James Jointer. So a lot of new names at Liberty. We did hear, not sure we mentioned it here before, you probably saw it, Day Hunter is not going to play this season, had previously entered the transfer portal months ago, and never announced a location for him to play in 2023. Made an announcement last week, I believe via Twitter, that he would be sitting out, still going to classes and looking to play in 2024. But even without Hunter, there's a lot of competition going on for carries at Liberty, and based on how Jamie Chadwell and his offense performed at Coastal Carolina, it's an offense that can provide multiple productive runners for sure. A few notes on the running back situation at LSU. Zach Nagy of LSU Country noted that Logan Diggs and Josh Williams were both viewed off to the side on Saturday, that both have been dealing with injuries. We've mentioned before, not necessarily expecting either to miss a lot of time, if any, really. But it sounds like, according to the reporting, that the coaches are just trying to be cautious with both players, not try to rush them back. But Williams specifically has missed a good chunk of camp, so he might be limited more so than Diggs, who early on was getting seemingly the majority of the first team reps. With those two out on Saturday, Noah Cain has stepped up, taken the majority of the first team reps over the last couple of practices, according to Nagy. There, of course, are plenty of options at LSU. It's a deep group. And Nagy did mention that Caleb Jackson, the true freshman, really took advantage of his opportunity, scored on a 19-yard touchdown run and a 70-yard touchdown run on Saturday. Wide receiver, the first team group, according to Nagy, on Saturday was Malik Neighbors, Brian Thomas Jr., and Kyron Lacey. Lacey being in the slot as expected. The second teamers, Chris Hilton Jr., Shelton Sampson Jr., and Aaron Anderson. At San Jose State, a quick note, the Spartans, of course, are playing in week 0 against USC. Andrew Pang of Inside the Spartans noted over the weekend that Justin Lockhart, starting wide receiver, was not viewed during the scrimmage. Might be a situation maybe we shouldn't read too much into. Lockhart has been in and out with an arm injury during fall camp thus far. Might be available in that week 0 game, might be less than 100% if he is. We will just have to see. My apologies. Forgot to close the door for this morning's show. At Georgia, Brooks Austin of Dogs Daily had a roundup on Saturday of a few injuries of note. We've mentioned many of these before, but Lawson Lucky, the tight end, suffered a high ankle sprain, has been limited or actually out since then. Kendall Milton still dealing with a hamstring injury that apparently has him limited this, leading into this weekend. Dejon Edwards got the number one snaps at running back, according to Austin on Saturday. Cash Jones was number 2. Branson Robinson still dealing with a foot injury. And then on the defensive side of the ball, a couple of notes of returning starters who've been limited. Kamari Lassiter has a foot injury and was in a non-contact jersey early last week. Sounds like perhaps he's ready to return to practice, has returned to practice, I should say, last week. But linebacker Smail Mondin has also been dealing with a foot injury, has not participated in full contact periods in fall, according to Austin. So potentially Georgia will be a little shorthanded at linebacker to begin the season. At South Alabama, Craig Stevenson of AL.com has mentioned a few times, and I believe we've noted it here, but it's getting to the point where I'm starting to take it a little bit more serious personally. LaDainian Webb, the all-conference running back, very productive player in CFF drafts, a top 4 or 5 round draft pick, maybe even higher than that. He's been limited quite a bit due to a nagging injury this fall. Did not scrimmage on Saturday, according to Stevenson. So not sure that he's out. Actually, I wouldn't expect he is out. Doesn't sound like necessarily, trying to read between the lines of the reports, but could be limited early this season. So just something to keep aware of for LaDainian Webb. At Western Kentucky, Fletcher Keel of the Towel Rack had a write-up of the receiver depth situation for the Hilltoppers, which of course is very important for us from a CFF standpoint. The lead-in to the piece said WKU's coaching staff seems uneasy about its wide receiver depth. As long as there's certainty at the top of the depth chart, of course, Malachi Corley, Dalvin Smith are primary receivers, and then Michael Matheson, I believe, was probably the best chance to be that third, potentially even second most productive receiver. But according to Keel, sort of deep in the piece, he mentions that, and quoting from it, assuming Matheson's injury is as severe as we're hearing, which I did a quick Twitter search, couldn't find any additional detail. So perhaps there's like a message board, something out there. I haven't dug into it enough quite yet. But Keel also mentioned that transfer Blue Smith was a wide receiver to keep an eye on, and Craig Burt Jr. is also reportedly expected to return. He had transferred briefly to the FCS level, but could be back and potentially immediately eligible. Not sure necessarily there. But Blue Smith is someone who started his career at Ohio State, then transferred to Cincinnati, hasn't really played much or been very productive thus far, but in terms of raw talent, was a really highly rated recruit. And actually in Phil Steele's preseason magazine was listed as a starter. So sounds like there's especially if there's an injury impacting Matheson. I listed him as questionable in the team profiles until we get some sort of confirmation that he will miss time. That's sort of, I guess, how I'm going to label him. But Blue Smith, it sounds like, is potentially next man up alongside Corley and Dalvin Smith. At Army, Ken McMillan of the Middleton Times-Herald Record finally gave a little bit of news or an update on a player who I've mentioned before, one of my personal favorites, and I think the most talented player on the Army roster, is Tyrell Robinson. And he missed basically the second half of last season, maybe even a little more. Early October, suffered an ACL injury that has basically limited him or made him completely unavailable since, of course, had to have surgery, but has missed all of spring. Apparently has also missed the vast majority of fall camp. According to head coach Jeff Monken, via McMillan, his injury was a bad injury. We do anticipate he's going to be back this season, certainly not for the first game. So have had to remove Tyrell Robinson from our depth chart projections because it sounds like he will not be on the field in week one. Hopefully it'll be fairly soon after that he returns. But another quote from Monken, his health is the most important thing and we'll get him healthy. We do anticipate he's going to be back sometime this fall, and I don't think it's going to be late into the season. Hopefully a week or a few weeks into the season, we're going to get him back there. So that's not necessarily good news. Robinson is incredibly explosive. Believe that he could be really a big-time playmaker in the new look Army offense, but won't be on the field, it sounds like, in week one and potentially could miss a few weeks as well. Final note, the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel tweeted out a piece over the weekend that gave more detail, but the headline offers probably what we need to know the most. Center Jake Renfro, a transfer from Cincinnati, expected to be a starter, has been dealing with a foot injury and is not expected to be ready for the opener. So that will do it for this morning's edition. We will, of course, be digging into more information as we see it for this afternoon on C2-A-Days. I expect we'll probably hear maybe a handful of starters named at quarterback. I don't necessarily expect Alabama to be in that mix, but you never know. So do check back with us this afternoon for the PM edition of C2-A-Days. I am Nicholas Ian Allen of Campus to Canton. Hope everyone has a wonderful Monday, and we'll talk to you again soon.